All right, and now for our main program. So one of the things that I really appreciate about Seattle 4 is that we are of a growth mindset. We look for ways to build bridges by expanding our minds and educating ourselves. So today we have retired hospitality executive, past president of the club, and also my Rotary sponsor, Paul Ishii, who will provide us an opportunity for growth and reflection as he leads the discussion entitled Islam for Dummies Like Me. Paul.
Thank you, Cindy. Bret and Reverend Randy, come on up. Take your seats right there. So weird. Retired is my title. I got to get used to that. Thank you, members, for letting me share the podium today. David, awesome call to prayer. Kind of reminds me of like the Christian Gregorian chant. A lot of faiths have these songs, these protocols, and it takes time to appreciate them, but the call to prayer is a very soulful kind of song and prayer and things like that. And it reminds me, years ago, I got this apartment that this company rented for me in Jakarta, and it was literally like 50 yards away from the mosque. So 3:34 in the morning, we were all woken up and had no idea what was going on. And so it kind of brings some good memories and some bad memories because I didn't know much about this faith at all. But I admire that our club continues to be a premier venue for all of us to continue to exchange ideas, trends, opinions, and above all, fellowship. So I have a confession to make. I was raised Catholic and accomplished the rigors of Holy Communion, confirmation, and what I call the other merit badges that come with it. My father was raised and adopted by Irish Catholic parents in Seattle and became president of Catholic College. So I am not a Muslim. And I thought about being Jewish a couple times. Islam has been a big part of my life, having lived and worked in 2 Islamic countries, Malaysia and Indonesia. Now it makes the headlines every day. Never did I think it would be such a big part of everyone's lives, especially here at home. Today I'll ask the obvious, leading to the more obvious, as we explore some of the basics of this faith culture that is more misunderstood than understood by non-Muslims like me. I took a different approach on this program, so I asked one American Christian and one secular freethinker that have lived 40 years each in Muslim countries. Bret, right here to my left, is one of our very own Seattle 4 members and has lived in Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Singapore, and Hungary as a Peace Corps volunteer, school teacher, headmaster in the international schools for over 40 years of his life. Islam has been a large part of his life, working, living, and teaching with Muslims most of his life. He and his wife, Toby, right down there, adopted 2 infants from Karachi, Pakistan. Both of the children were left at the doorsteps of a cloistered Catholic monastery in a village in Karachi. The Muslim village was hoping the infants would be taken in by the holy nuns to have a better life. My aunt happened to be the mother superior of this monastery. And yes, she and her nuns had a plan. They asked Bret and Toby to adopt both of them. It changed their lives and saved the lives of the infants. Their names are Cordero and Asia. Bret attended Willamette University, Michigan State University, and Columbia University. On my far left, Reverend Randy Martin has been a missionary and a pastor and has lived over 40 years of his life in Malaysia and Indonesia. He and I grew up together in Kuala Lumpur when we were, 3rd, 4th grade. We used to be fishing mates, and we've been friends ever since. He will be sharing his experience of being a Christian minority, a Christian pastor in a Muslim country for most of his life. Randy and his family recently returned back to the USA and now preaches in Colville, Washington. A big transition. Randy's brother, father, and his wife, Colleen, are all missionaries, pastors. Bless their hearts. Randy attended the Asia Pacific Theological Seminary in the Philippines and the Northwest Bible College. Brett and Randy will share their unique perspectives being teachers, preachers, dwellers, and travelers as Christian minorities and a free thinker living in Muslim countries. So let's get started. Give me a second while I walk over here. Randy, Brett, thanks for coming. Some real quick trivia here. 25% of the world's population is Muslim. 1% of the USA is Muslim, 70% Christianity, 22.8% unaffiliated, 1.9% Judaism. 87% of the mosques in the USA have been built in the last 3 decades. 48% of Americans feel uncomfortable with a woman wearing a hijab. And Muslims represent the youngest average of all major religious groups, 24 versus 32. Approximately 25-30% of the African slaves that were brought to the USA were Muslim. And the first country to recognize the USA as an independent nation was the Sultanate of Morocco in 1777. That's real trivia. Okay, let's get into some questions here. We'll start with Brett. One question I've always had is, a non-Muslim was, God, I went, there's so many of these denominations, so many of these sects. I mean, who is who and what is what in Islam? Can you explain a little bit about that, Brett?
Sure, Paul. First of all, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum to everyone, which is the way that a Muslim says hello. It means peace unto you. Now, if you ask a Muslim person how many forms of Islam are there, they'll tell you there's only one, and it follows the book. But if we look at demographics and history, there are few more than one. You see this chart up here. The two main divisions, of course, are Shia and Sunni, but there's also the Ahmadi, which are considered not Muslims by Muslims, but they follow all the Muslim practices. And you can see that Shia are all broken down into different kind, and so are Sunni. You might have heard of the Aga Khan, who's famous for his racehorses. Well, he is the head of the Ismaili religion, which is Muslim. But you think this is complicated? Can I have the next slide? These are Christians. So how many Muslims, how many different kinds of Islam? I don't know. And it changes because different groups form, different traditions, and have different beliefs. Does that answer your question?
Sure does. Thank you very much. So it's a little more complicated than you think, but also similar to many other religious faiths. There's so many branches. One more question, Brett, then I'll move on to Randy. Today, the Weston, thanks Weston, provided a halal lunch. And so what is halal food? I mean, is kosher food okay for a Muslim to eat? Or what's the origin of no pork? I mean, I have a close Muslim friend, and he goes, you know what? Pork, no way. But ham is just fine. So what's the deal on this halal? I mean, what is it?
Well, first let me tell you, there are pamphlets on the table.
Thanks.
So please take a look at these. There'll be a test before you can leave. Okay, take them with you. Recommend this Why Islam website that's mentioned. Now, halal food, which is the kind of food you just ate just now, this is a halal meal, means that it's prepared in accordance with the religious traditions, which are based on health reasons. During the time that Islam was founded, pigs were not raised in very safe ways. And that's also the reason why the Jews forbid pork, because of the danger of trichinosis. Many of these dietary considerations are based on real practical scientific reasons. Now, can a Jew...
Hold it, your mic came.
My mic? Oh, I didn't pay my electric bill.
Thanks, Ken.
the two traditions, halal and kosher, are very similar in that they both have very particular descriptions of how food can be prepared. Both traditions say you must drain the animal of blood before you eat it. You must kill the animal in a humane way. A Muslim could eat kosher food, no problem. But a Jew who follows the traditions completely could not eat halal food because the Jewish tradition requires that the animal be killed by a Jew in a quick and humane manner. There's some other differences too. The Muslims use salt to clean the last bits of blood from the meat, and the Jewish people use vinegar. But aside from that, they're somewhat similar, but a little bit exclusive.
Thank you. Okay, Randy, let's get to you here and ask you some questions. Now, most of us are familiar with the Ten Commandments of Christianity, but I've heard about the 5 pillars of Islam. What are those?
In Islam, there are 5 basic pillars of faith that the Muslims are encouraged to perform or do that help strengthen their faith. And those are, the first is to recite the Shahada, which is the creed, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Muhammad is his messenger from God. The next is to pray, and as we heard earlier, there are, or maybe it was just at our table, but there are 5, usually the Sunnis pray 5 times a day, the Shias will only pray 3, but they have prescribed times that they will pray. The call of prayer that you hear 5 times a day in Indonesia and also Malaysia. And when it is the opening of the fasting month or during the fasting month, it's like an echo, because one mosque starts and then the next mosque starts, and it's just a constant echo 5 times a day when they can eat and can't eat. The next one is giving of alms. They are required to give alms to the poor, and usually it's done through the mosque. They give a certain amount of their income, and it's divided up among the poor. And then fasting, they're required to fast during the month of Ramadan. When you can't distinguish the difference between a black and a white thread, you can eat. When you can distinguish the difference between a black and a white thread, then you cannot eat. So it's not just eating, but there are a lot of other things that are involved. You have all kinds of physical abstinence, not just eating, drinking, sexual relationships. All these things during the daylight hours are considered haram or not proper to do. But at night, they'll open the fast and then they eat. As they open the fast, they get up at midnight, and then before the fast, before they have to stop eating, then they'll get up in the morning again. So during the month of Ramadan, not much gets done in most Muslim countries, to be honest. The officials come in late, they go out early, and anyways, it's from experience that I speak, going to immigration and other things. So the final thing is going on the Hajj, and it is a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage. Some go more, depending on where you're from. They look at it a little different, but to go and perform a certain rituals in the city of Mecca, in Jeddah, and several places in the area, they have a set routine. Each country is given, Muslim countries are given a quota, so only so many can come from Indonesia, and so many from each of the nations, and it's a very important thing. It's a very spiritual experience for Muslims as they go. For many of them, they would like to die in Mecca. So they have to have a health checkup before they go, because if they die on a holy ground, they receive a lot more blessings that way. And so a lot of them would like to do that.
Thanks, Randy. Another question. We know about, Bible, the Torah, the Book of Mormon, the Quran. I mean, what does that word mean? And then also, what's the best pronunciation? Do you say Muslim or Muslim? So,
Well, I think Muslim is what most people in the world would say, unless you're from England, and they use that as the old spelling, and so we would say Muslim, but average person, Muslim is I think more accepted, and but
better protocol.
Better protocol.
Okay.
And a Muslim is one who gives himself to God. If you look at a definition. And what was the rest of the question?
Just what the word Quran means.
The Quran simply means recitation, reading or reciting. When Muhammad received the visions from Gabriel, traditionally he was considered, or they say that he could not read or write, and so he had to memorize it all, and so that's why he recited. The angel spoke to him, and then he would recite back, and so that is the oral tradition that happens in many countries. And finally, Islam, the word Islam itself just simply means submission or obedience to God.
Now, sometimes, well, I've read these stories about the Quran, maybe someone mishandling the book, whatever, and something bad happens. I mean, is there, as a non-Muslim, what's the protocol in handling the Quran?
I think in any holy writ of any religion, you need to be respectful. And even if you do not agree with their faith, to be respectful. The average Muslim would have a Quran in a prominent place. They would usually have it wrapped in something. A lot of times they'll have these little wedge-like things where they put a book on, and they would place it there. Most Muslims have taken lessons in school as children. They learn to read it. Many of them do not understand, but they can recite the Quran, but they don't understand what the words mean. But you ask them and they'll recite chapter after chapter, but understanding is something. But to be respectful, it's just like in America, sometimes we are not as respectful if we're Christians with our Bibles. We put them in places, sometimes we lay them on the floor, they touch our feet or something like that. And to a Muslim, that would be abhorrent. So be respectful, and that's something the Muslims are with their Holy Scripture.
Thank you. Yeah, Bret.
Can I just add that the Quran is written in Arabic, and Muslims believe that it's the exact word of God that was taken down and given to Muhammad. So that's why they say there's no change. The same Quran that Muhammad got is the one that you have now. And that's why you must treat it with respect. It's the actual word of God written in Arabic. And so kids will memorize the Arabic sounds, but they don't always understand what it means.
Got it. Bret, sometimes whenever I hear this word, it sounds like it's a scary word, and that's a fatwa. I mean, what is a fatwa?
Fatwa is an opinion by a well-respected Muslim scholar. Now, there are a lot of rules and regulations in everyday society. Some of them are based on religion, some of them are based on culture, some of them are based on tradition. And so a Muslim leading a good life who lived in Iran would have some slightly different rules and regulations than a Muslim who was, let's say, living in Egypt. And because there are these slight differences, quite often they want to get resolved, should I do it this way or that? I bought this land, I want to build a house, I found out that it used to be a cemetery, can I still build a house? So they go to the imam and they ask the imam this question, he thinks about it, he studies it, he maybe consults other imams, and he issues a fatwa, which says, in my opinion, this is what it is. Now, we have heard fatwas that Khomeini issued recalling for the death of Salman Rushdie. That's really an unusual one, maybe more politically motivated than most. Okay. But fatwas are issued all the time by many different people, and it's basically a considered religious opinion.
Okay. Another question here. Since you spent, well, decades in these Muslim countries, had anyone try to convert you to Islam? And, is it easy to be a Muslim?
Well, it's easy to be a Muslim if... Woo. Sorry.
Wake up.
There's a great phrase you hear in Muslim countries, Insha'Allah, which means God willing. So I'll try and answer that question, Insha'Allah. It's easy to become a Muslim. All you really have to do is accept that there is one God and Muhammad is his prophet. And you can learn all the rest of the stuff. Since I lived in small towns and taught school, they were constantly concerned that I was going to not end up well in the afterlife. So kids or parents would try and convert me to their faith. They were always very respectful. The discussions were about history, about what it could do for me, about the good that I would receive. But I never quite made the jump to convert.
But it's pretty quick. You can,
Oh yeah,
boom,
all you have to do is recite one sentence,
and done.
and you're considered a Muslim.
Okay.
Many Muslims consider all human beings Muslim at birth, but then along the way you change your mind.
Got it. Thank you. Randy, now, Islam is, a lot of folks think Islam is just in the Middle East. Living in Southeast Asia and South Asia, I mean, give us some numbers of Islam there. I mean, obviously I'm wrong that it's not just the Middle East. Tell me more about where else, particularly in Southeast Asia.
Well, the largest Muslim or populous Muslim nation in the world is Indonesia, where I lived. And depending on whose statistics, there's anywhere from 205 to 225 million Muslims that live in that country. And they're divided between what we'd call folk Muslims, who've mixed up their animistic faith and Hindu faith and Buddhist faith that were all part of their heritage. And then there's another third that are more fundamental, and then you have nominal Muslims. But there is a large amount of Muslims there. If you add all the Muslims in the Arab countries, excluding Egypt, there are more Muslims in Indonesia.
Wow.
Than all of the Middle East. And so India has, what did we say, 170 million, I think, Muslims. And then Malaysia is a large Muslim country. So you have a lot of Muslims, and each of the countries are a little different. If the Arab Muslims come to Indonesia, they say, these aren't Muslims. They don't do it the right way. And, it's each country has a little twist on Islam, and so they do it different. But
so there's a lot of cultural intersections, just like
Yes,
any
there is.
widespread religion.
So it's interesting, in Indonesia, the Ramayana, which is a Hindu epic, is one of the major cultural dances that they do in Indonesia. I mean, here's Rama and Siva and all the Hindu gods, and these Muslim people are dancing and doing a Hindu dance, but they're Muslims. So it's a real kind of a contradiction in terms of being Muslim but being Hindu, but they mix it up. And that's where syncretism comes in a lot of things. They mix from one and another, and it kind of becomes a unique thing all by itself.
Now, being a Christian missionary, I would think converting people wherever you're going to becoming a Christian is kind of a part of the mission. Did yourself or any of your peers try to convert a Muslim to Christianity? And, was it dangerous to do that? Or what's the protocol on that?
Well, I grew up in Malaysia. My parents lived and were missionaries there. And in Malaysia, the nation is an Islamic republic. And so it was illegal if you were caught trying to proselyte a Muslim person, you would be kicked out of the country. So constitutionally, Malay people, the majority of the people in Malaysia are Muslim, whether they want to be or not. In Indonesia, it's different. It's a secular nation, and so if Muslims want to change their faith, legally it's possible. Legally they can do that, depending on where you live and what family you come from, is how hard it is. There are some very strong Muslim areas such as Aceh where the tsunami hit, and it's under Sharia law, Islamic law, and so Christians are not allowed even to move there. And if as a foreigner to go there, unless I was an aid worker, it would be impossible for me to go and live there. So it is different wherever you are, and India has different, Malaysia has different laws and stuff, but
So when you apply for a visa, you have to specifically put on there that you're a priest or a reverend.
I was a theological teacher, so I taught in two of our theological schools in Indonesia through our church, and so I was probably one of the few traditional missionaries. Others came in as teachers, and they worked in other areas or consultants or different areas. But
Okay. So I mean, it leads me to the next question, where here you are in the most populous Islamic country on the planet, and you have this Christian theological place. I mean, why would you? I mean, is that dangerous?
I never felt in danger anytime, even though one time towards the end of one of our 4-year terms there, they found one of the guys that was the Bali bomber, and he was about half an hour away from our house, and the police found him and had a gun battle, and he was killed, as they usually are. But I never felt dangerous, even though I had Muslim neighbors and stuff. We had a good relationship. When I grew up in Malaysia, when it was the time for the breaking of the fast, we would go into their homes, and we do Christmas with the Christians, we do with the Hindus, we'd go for their special festivals, for the Chinese New Year. We mixed together. We had a lot of fun together. We ate together. It was really a good time. In Indonesia, it wasn't quite like that, but they were open to us. I could let my kids go and play with the Muslim neighbors. They'd take them and babysit them. We had no problems. My wife and my daughter felt safer physically in Indonesia, in a Muslim country, than they do in America. So we never felt in danger because we were Christians.
Okay. And we get 25 minutes to cover a lot of stuff here, so.
Can I add something?
Yeah,
Paul?
go ahead.
All of the countries in the world that have Islam as the official religion also have part of their constitution that guarantees religious freedom for anybody who lives in the country. In fact, in Pakistan, if you ever see their flag, it's green about this much, and there's a strip of white along the flagpole. This represents the non-Muslims, and the green represents the Muslims. So they do respect other people's right to have their own religion. No more conversions by the sword.
Briefly, we were chatting earlier about, women in Islam, and that's huge, very complicated, A to Z kind of topic, just very, very complicated. But in Indonesia in particular, how are women viewed or treated there? I mean, compared to the usual stereotypes we have.
In Indonesia, women are free to vote. They're free to drive cars. They're free to be business people. They don't have any restrictions. They're still culturally have a role that they have to play, and there are those elements, cultural elements involved. But women can basically do whatever they want within reason in Indonesia, and they're not looked down as second-class citizens.
Got it.
We have a president that was a woman, Megawati, who was Sukarno's daughter, and so one of the former presidents. So women have a vital place in trade, the economy, and everything in Indonesia.
Thank you. Bret, how were you treated and stereotyped in the Muslim countries you lived in?
I was always treated with courtesy and respect. I was a teacher, so that entitled me to a special respect. But just as a human being, if I was driving my motorcycle along the road and it broke down, I'd have no hesitation to go to the nearest house and say, I need help. And when I was in Pakistan as a teacher there, as a school principal, we were evacuated because of the first Gulf War, so they had to close down the school. Well, we came back to the country and opened up the school, and one of the parents of one of the students in our middle school came up to me and said, I was so sorry to hear you go. You didn't have to go. You could have come to my house and I would have protected you against anything. So next time there's trouble, you come to my house. So that spirit of hospitality is very, very strong. It's a very big component of Islamic culture.
And not just Islamic, but Asian culture as a whole. But in Malaysia and Singapore both, and well, Indonesia, because my parents lived in Singapore, the people are very hospitable. You could meet me, I could meet a Muslim person on the street, and they would invite me to their house, they would feed me, they would invite me to come stay in their home, live in their home. They didn't know me from Adam. But there's that kind of hospitality that is a part of their culture, and so we appreciated that, and something that I think we used to do in America in years past that we don't do quite as much anymore. So we could learn from the example of many of these people.
Bret, praying 5 times a day, 3 times a day, I mean, that's a lot. However, I am starting to pray more often myself. But I know you need, as a Muslim, you need to pray in the direction of Mecca. And so, I mean, how do you do that? With a compass? Or if you're in the middle of a cornfield, where do you go? I mean, how do you do that?
Well, not surprisingly, now there's an app you can get for your phone. and there's also a website. They publish little handbooks that will show you where you are and what direction you should pray. Basically, you should pray towards the Kaaba, which is that big black stone building that you always see in pictures of Saudi Arabia. So from this direction, you would pray sort of southwest. If you're in a hotel room in a Muslim country, if you look up on the ceiling, somewhere there'll be a little arrow pointing to show you that's the direction that you should pray. All of these things, the praying 5 times a day, praying the right direction, they're all part of what in Malay, the Malay word is masyarakat, which means community. And so you do these things to become part of the Muslim community. It's very, very important. You go to mosque because you meet other Muslims. You pray and you face that direction because all Muslims are doing that. It's a very, very important part.
Yeah, go ahead, Red.
To add to that, masyarakat is a word in Indonesia. Ummah is the Arabic word, and it means community. And if you want to understand Muslims, we have to understand that Muslims look at their worldview as a holistic worldview. Their religion, their family, all these things are part of one. They're not segmented. The Western world, we have our religious stuff here, we have our work here, we have family here. We're segmented in our lives, but in the Muslim world, it's a holistic view. So if you are dealing with family issues, it affects religious issues, it affects legal issues, it affects all the others. And so when something happens, that affects their lives. And I just want to make a closing statement now. We're running out of time, but as I lived in Indonesia, I found Indonesians and Malaysians who are just like people like you and I. There are those that can be radicalized, and it's a small percentage, but they like to fish, they like to go and take their grandkids out. They are people that they like to eat good food too. They enjoy the same things that we do. It may be in a little different context and culture, but they're people like you and I. And if they got to understand us and we understand them, I think it would help us. Because there's fear. They think that they visualize Americans as what they see on the television. And we're not all like the movie stars and everything that happens in Hollywood, nor are they like all the people with their own movie stars and their own soap operas. And so, but they're people like you and I, and as we get to know them, we will get to develop relationships and build that community. I would like to thank you. If you've never lived in a country where there's malaria, or you have to walk 7 kilometers to get a drink or take a bath, or have suffered polio, I know these are 3 of the major things that you deal with, and I thank you, because Indonesia is a nation that is affected by these 3 things. And I appreciate you reaching out as a club and as a service organization to touch the world and help people who don't have what we have here in America. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Randy. Bret, your closing remarks?
This is not really the closing remarks, but I should have mentioned this earlier, and that's Sharia law. And people are very afraid of this, and they think it's imposing strict code where you cut off the hands of thieves and you stone unfaithful women to death. That is a part of it in some areas. But Sharia law is a broad term that says this is the way that we interpret you should live your life according to Islam and our culture. So it's different in Iran than it is in Egypt, than it is in Morocco. Each culture imposes its own ideas.
That's a huge point, yeah. Huge.
It's not like they're going to come to the United States and impose Sharia law. First of all, it would take them years to figure out what that would be.
Yeah.
If you want to find out a legal question that affects your life as a Muslim, you go and you ask a cleric, and then they have a discussion. So it's not a legal document. Some countries have enacted segments of Sharia law, Sharia tradition, as part of their legal system, like us. But for the most part, it's a collection of culture, traditions, and Islamic regulations.
Thank you. Gentlemen, appreciate your time. We had a few more questions, of course, so we just don't have the time for it. Randy, thanks for driving all the way from Colville, Washington. Yeah. And Bret, again, Bret's my brother-in-law. We've known each other for many, many years, and also a very good friend and a fellow Rotarian. Gentlemen, thank you. Hope this will answer some basic questions and info on your tables, and there's so much information out there. Thank you.
Right.